Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Michael Rubino, who is a mold and air quality expert, environmental wellness advocate, and founder of HomeCleanse, a revolutionary company with a vision to end the worldwide health epidemic caused by poor air quality and toxic indoor environments. He's also the chair and co-founder of Change the Air Foundation and host of the Never Been Sicker podcast. I've been following him on Instagram for a long time now, and previously as the mold medic, and I'm excited to finally have this conversation. So, welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you and my listeners know I had a baby recently who we named Michael. So every time I think of saying Michael, I want to say Mikey. So I'm going to try to not call you Mikey through this
It's a
interview.
great name, by the way.
So your parents chose wisely. I'm going to try to call you Michael. So tell us, Michael, how did you become such a mold expert?
Well, you mean like as a kid, people don't want to just become mold experts? Is that a thing?
Is there a story
Uh,
behind that? Were you personally affected?
yeah, I mean, basically, the story is my dad's been a restoration contractor since I'm five, so I'm a second generation restoration contractor. Woohoo, right? I never took an interest in the family business like whatsoever. I went to school originally to become an architect and realized I couldn't draw, and apparently that's a big thing. You need to be able to draw to be an architect. And so ended up switching to marketing and business and going on a different path. And it was right around Hurricane Sandy happens. I moved back home, and I'm taking my newfound marketing expenditures over to his business to help him kind of rebrand and put a facelift on his company that was in existence for 20 plus years. Part of that process was me going out with him on like ride-alongs and starting to go to clients' homes and getting a bit of understanding of, what people are looking for in
Sure.
a restoration contractor. So it was like market research. Well, part of this market research, I started seeing this pattern of people being sick inside their own homes
Sure.
after this massive hurricane kind of came in and decimated homes. And I'm in my mid 20s at the time. I didn't really connect the dots ever that somebody's house could make them sick. And so when
Hmm.
I started seeing this pattern of people being sick inside their own homes, especially right after this big water damage event, I started to really look at this as a potential problem
Yeah.
that as I started diving into the research, no one really seemed to be advocating for solving this problem. It was
Yeah.
very cosmetic based. You've got some water damage, you paint over it. You've got mold, you throw some bleach on it. It was very like a very superficial thing. And the industry standards at the time, they weren't as good as they are today. I'll tell you that. And so having to go through and see this pattern of people being sick, begging for help, and even my dad, didn't really understand the brevity of the situation at the time. As I dove into that and became certified myself and took a passion into helping people, after the first two or three people that I've helped, and really started to build this process around how do we create a healthy home. I fell in love with everything. I mean, and just watching people transform their lives before and after. It was a pretty remarkable endeavor, and so my passion started growing for this industry mainly out of the results and
Yeah.
seeing those results and watching how badly it can impact people. Oh, and by the way, especially we're talking like the early 2000s and 2010s, there wasn't a lot of treatment options. There wasn't a lot of people talking about this. I mean, when I went to trade school to learn these types of things, no one even mentioned the word mycotoxins, right? And so we
Yeah.
were we were in like the Stone Age, I would consider it,
Sure.
compared to where we are today. And so it was really exciting to be able to help kind of pioneer, this process and this industry. And looking back, I mean, it's still I look at it like it's still an infant in terms of where we need to be and where we are.
Yeah. And we've come a long ways, but I agree. So tell me why indoor air quality is such a missing link for better health. So how can air quality really affect our health and longevity? I know you could probably spend half an hour on this answer, but
In simple terms, I mean, we take 20,000 breaths per day, right? So that's a lot of air. You're consuming up probably about 2,500 gallons of air every day. It's about enough to fill up a normal size swimming pool. So I want to put that perspective.
yeah.
You can't go more than a few minutes without air, right? So air
Mhm.
is extremely vital for human health.
Sure.
You can go a few days without water. You can go a few weeks without food, right? And so I look at those three things as really important for human health. Obviously, what we're breathing, super important. I would say arguably the most important thing. we can go down rabbit holes, look up infectious diseases, figure out what the greatest route of exposure is. It's typically going to be air transmission, right? Then you have water, obviously contaminated water and drinking water that
Mhm.
has impurities in it that could be harmful for the human body. And of course, food, right? As a matter of fact, I think we all know so much about food. It's like the first thing we always look at when we want to get healthy. We're like, I'm going on a diet, right? Everybody has said that. And so I want to just remind people that yes, food's important, but let's not
Air
forget
is
about
more important.
the quality of water we're drinking, which I would
Yeah.
argue would be more important than food. And then, of course, even more important than that would be air and the air we're breathing. And
Yeah, that's
so
good. Yep.
that is why, I mean, there's many reasons. There's hundreds of medical journals you can read if you want more of a scientific approach. But to keep things basic, that's why I think air quality is an important missing link in human health.
Sure. Okay, so then what contaminants can we find in our homes? I mean, obviously we're talking about mold today, but kind of expand on that. Specifically, what could be found in the air? And I guess I should also say in the dust in our homes, but maybe we'll stick with air first.
Yeah, we'll talk about air first, dive into dust. So when you're breathing 20,000 times per day indoors, where you spend 90% of your time, according to the EPA, and just according to all of us being humans, and look where we are right now, we're both indoors. I would say that you're going to be breathing in dust, which is typically dead hair and skin cells. You're going to be breathing in mold, unfortunately. You're going to be breathing in bacteria. You're going to be breathing in viruses, VOCs, formaldehyde, microplastics.
Yeah.
Animal proteins if you have animals, pet dander if you have animals, dust mites, and all kinds of stuff you traditionally do not want to be breathing in, because all this stuff that you're breathing in, if it's small enough, like mold, for example, or viruses or bacteria, they're going to bypass your self-defense mechanisms, entering your bloodstream. So essentially, inhalation then turns into ingestion. And then you also have dermal exposure. Your skin's the largest organ. And so you're going to have some exposure, just to your skin as well. And so thinking about it from that perspective, there's a lot of crap that enters your body, unfortunately, every time you take a breath. And there's a lot of breaths that happen every day, about 20,000.
A lot. That makes me think more about rashes. I have so many patients that are moldy that manifest with rashes. And I guess I was thinking, well, obviously that can be an immune reaction, but they also could be detoxing through their skin. Or do you think that's more just that potential contaminants in the air are affecting the skin? Do you have I don't know, I'm just speaking out loud, thinking kind of,
Yeah, I think there's two things there. So you have the dermal exposure right through
yeah,
the
yeah.
skin, and you have inflammation happening in the skin. So that's definitely a route.
Hmm.
But then
Hmm.
also, like, I mean, if anything you're ingesting that your body has, inflammation that occurs in your GI tract. I mean, I see so many issues with skin
Yep,
as like the way that gets displayed, right? And so
yep,
I think because you have that double whammy, skin issues are like biggest red flag that there's something wrong with your environment. And I think
yep, yep.
you know a lot of people neglect the environmental factors when they should be looking at that first.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so what are some of the first symptoms? Obviously, you're not a provider, but based on your experience, and it sounds like from the position you were in, you were seeing sick patients or sick clients, I should say. Like, what are some of the first symptoms you heard the clients complain of that kind of led you to connect the dots between their air quality in their homes and their health issues?
I say the top two things that you hear of repeatedly are brain fog and chronic fatigue. If anybody
Yep,
is
yep,
experiencing brain fog and chronic fatigue, I'd say you probably have an environmental issue. I mean, that's such an environmental red flag to have those two symptoms. And I'd say the third one is going to be skin issues. And skin issues, I know we have to say skin issues and put a big basket in there because it could be like eczema,
hmm,
could be rashes, could be hives. I mean,
yeah,
it's going to show up in different ways in different people, but if you're dealing with brain fog or chronic fatigue or these skin issues that seem to improve, by the way, when you're not at home, that's a pretty big clue that, like, okay, I'm dealing with some environmental factors and I want to get my house checked and see what's going on.
yep. I agree. I feel like brain fog is very common, and it's something that conventional medicine doesn't always treat, other than like give patients stimulants for focus or whatnot. Like they're not really
Right.
looking at the environment or looking at the root cause. We've
Totally.
talked a lot about this on the podcast, but just to remind the listeners, mold symptoms can manifest in any organ system. So it could even be a migraine. It could be like diarrhea. It could be fungus on the toenails. Like it could really manifest. Unfortunately, I know we say Lyme is the great mimicker, but I think mold can be a great mimicker too, because sometimes
Yeah.
symptoms are so vague and it's just hard to peel back the layers and figure out what's wrong with the patient. But we now thankfully are looking at things like environment. So we won't spend too much time on symptoms, but um, tell tell the listeners any hints that they may have a mold problem in their home. Like we just talked about symptoms, but I guess I'm saying more visually. Like what are some hot spots or things that they could be looking for that would clue them in that, hey, yes, I probably have some sort of, we'll say, air quality or environmental issue.
I mean, honestly, if you don't feel your best, if you don't feel optimal, I mean, I would say that you need to check your air quality. And it's really that simple because we talked about this earlier, but obviously having clean air is so important for human health. It displays in so many different ways. I've seen the most, like, you would never guess certain symptoms could be tied to certain things. I had a woman who's so sick. She literally was in a wheelchair with a GJ feeding tube installed into her lower intestine to essentially give her the nutrients to keep her alive. She was in a moldy house. She gets out of the moldy house. Guess what? GJ feeding tube's gone. She's eating again. She's walking again, like miraculous stuff. I mean,
It's so
I,
nuts. I believe it, but that's just like, it's
I,
so nuts that, yeah.
like every autoimmune disease you could think of, I promise you, there's some sort of mold play there. You know, you
Mhm.
will develop some level of sensitivity to mold with any autoimmune disease. I've seen it. I've seen improving air quality help pretty much any autoimmune disease that you have. I've seen, inhalational Alzheimer's and the amazing work Dr. Dale Bredesen's
Mhm,
doing.
mhm.
And I've seen people literally reverse
Yeah.
Alzheimer's by improving the quality of air they're breathing. Like, I know the pharmaceutical world that we've all grown up in has us believing that, when you have problems, it's because you need this specific pill and it is what it is. But no, I truly believe that when we have problems, we have to look at what's the air, what's the water, what's the food, right? We just had thousands of people get sick in Red Hill up in Hawaii because of the jet fuel that spilled into the water supply, right? We have to start looking at environmental factors and being cognizant of these things when we're dealing with health. So I say, because it's so vast, if you aren't feeling your best, please check your environment. That's like this step number one. When we look at visual signs, how do we check our
Yeah.
environment? Like, what are some of the signs? Well, visually, if you see signs of water damage, you probably have mold. And a lot of people, they look for mold, right? They think they have mold, they start looking for mold. And mold can be a little bit elusive and difficult to find. And the reason being is because more likely than not, it's going to be behind the wall, behind the ceiling, in the HVAC, in an attic, in a basement, or a crawl space, places that are very difficult for you to actually look. I've even seen mold grow on a wall, and you would have no idea unless you either shined a black light on the wall or took a high powered flashlight and shined it at the surface, basically vertically downwards or upwards, so that the light is kind of horizontal with the surface. And this just ever so slightly shows you this depiction of mold spotting on the wall. And it's really because certain molds can be like white, they can be gray, depending on the color walls you have, might not be abundantly obvious, right? And depending on
Mhm.
the type of mold that you have. And so look for signs of water damage instead of looking for mold, and you're more likely to find where the mold problems are. So coffee like stains that you see on like ceiling tiles or on walls or ceilings,
Mhm.
you're looking for drip marks and drip stains. You're looking for condensation problems where like condensation is developing in different locations, because we want to prevent that if we want to prevent mold growth, right? You're going to look on the outside and on the inside, because sometimes you could actually see water damage stains on the outside of the building, and maybe they don't show on the inside because they're actually coming in between the exterior and the interior wall,
Mhm.
right? And so that can give you a clue. You could use thermal imaging cameras, which every single year they get cheaper and cheaper. You can find them, on Amazon now. You don't have to spend $2,000 anymore to get those things,
To look
and
for
you can look at.
moisture or like what's that looking
Well, they
for?
look
Like,
for temperature differentials. And
okay.
so when you see temperature differentials, that gives you an understanding that there could be moisture there, right? If I have a temperature differential around an HVAC vent, well, that means most likely I'm having condensation develop around that
Okay.
HVAC
Okay.
vent because there's not enough insulation that can stop the temperature differential from getting into the drywall, right? And this brings us back to like third grade science class. When you see temperature differentials, you're going to see condensation, right? And so we want to look for any sort of oddities that might be happening. And then we're probably going to want to bring in somebody that can test for us, right? They use those tools and technologies. Looking for visual signs of water damage. They're looking for temperature differentials and oddities that could be a sign of water intrusion, right? So the other temperature differential you would see is if I have water coming into a wall, that water is typically going to be cooler than the rest of the wall. So I might notice like an odd water pattern in that thermal imaging camera inside of a wall cavity that could only be explained by not having insulation in that area or water coming into that area cooling down the rest of the area. So we want to look at, these different tools and technologies to help us give us some clues. And then we test to validate, is there mold there? What kind of mold is there? How much of it is there? And using that information, we can put together a plan to actually remediate the house properly so that when we're spending money there, it's kind of making sense. Otherwise, I mean, people that have like gotten mold dogged and have done all these things, that's great if you have unlimited money and you're willing to open up and remediate every little time, the dog sits down and says, hey, I think there's a problem here, right? But if you want to actually understand what's going to move the needle and improve the quality of air I'm breathing, well, you're going to want to have some data around that, right? And so the goal is using these kind of tools and countermeasures to look for problems. We can then assess and figure out, well, how bad are these problems and what should I do to fix it? Last but not least, smell. Clean is the absence of smells. So if I walk into a house and it smells, like a hound dog, I'm trying to figure out what could be causing this smell, right? And so when we smell that earthy, musty odor, that is mold literally feeding off your building materials actively. And what you're experiencing is the byproducts that mold is creating as it's off-gassing, essentially mold farts. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're smelling that odor, that's not like a normal, every basement shouldn't smell like that, by the way. So when it smells like that, we know there's a mold problem. We want to actually fix that. So when you smell odd odors, like a hound dog, you should be going around trying to figure out where the heck is that coming from, right?
Yep. What a good, thorough answer. Thank you. Now I want to ask you like 10 questions based on that, but I want to go back to, you were mentioning like Dale Bredesen, even in his research, I may murder this, but I swear he says something like a third of all early onset Alzheimer cases are from mold. So everyone wants to age well and preserve their memory. So I feel like we should all be looking for these sort of environmental contributors, specifically mold, because I don't know about you, but I want to age well, and clearly mold could be a big variable there. So I just wanted to comment on that because I'm glad you brought him up. But I want to go back to a lot of things you just said. So I want to start with HVAC system. So like, what can we look for on our HVAC system? What can go wrong? I know you already said condensation, whatnot, but like, I know at least with my system, we had a humidifier, or maybe you either installed or it came with it, and which I think they say obviously you turn the humidity off in a humid Iowa summer and then turn it on in the winter when it's more dry. Do you agree with that? I mean, should I be having that on my HVAC system, or could something go awry with that? Like,
yeah, I mean, notoriously, those humidifiers are kind of not great.
yeah. Do you have one?
Notoriously,
I'm just putting you on the spot.
I
No.
don't, but I also live in Florida. I mean, my humidity is like
Already high.
I just
Yeah. You don't
naturally
need it.
have
Yeah.
humidity, right? So I definitely wouldn't need one here. But
Mhm.
when I grew up in New Jersey, I didn't have one. I like going into thousands of homes in New Jersey and New York and
Yeah.
that surrounding area, like every single humidifier I've ever looked at and taken apart was disgusting. I mean, full of mold and bacteria. And the reason being is because it's creating water, and there's always this ability for that machine to trap moisture, create condensation because it obviously is trying to create water and humidity. It vaporizes that water, and then it kind of puts it out into the rest of the house. So those machines are not very good. Now, technology has changed. There are better ones on the marketplace. I personally prefer to have one of those like room ones. There's this company, I think it's called the HomePod. I'm probably butchering the name. Sure. I've been seeing it a lot recently. And I actually really like this machine because there's only one reason. The ability to take it apart and clean it really thoroughly is really helpful. It doesn't really have any cavities where moisture can get trapped that you're not able to clean out properly. And that's what you really want in a humidifier, because at the end of the day, when you're adding humidity to a space, you have to understand that there's going to be some level of, mold or bacteria that will grow over time because it's a wet reservoir. Right. And it only takes 24 to 48 hours for mold and bacteria to start to grow. Right. And so, it's anything that has water is a ticking time bomb in that sense. If moisture gets trapped, then it's not fluid. right? So with that being said, I prefer the room ones that you can monitor, ones that have humidistats that they could turn on and off. And if you're going to get one installed in the HVAC system because you live in a climate where, the winter time, it's high dry heat and you need some humidity, or maybe you have a lot of woodwork in your house and that can get damaged if the humidity is too low. Okay, fine. But like do your research, get one that's a lot more, that's as cleanable as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and get one that is going to have some control to it. Like the last thing you want is for something to be, creating like 80% humidity in your house,
Oh, of
because
course. Yeah.
once you get past 60%, you're in that danger zone
Danger
for
zone.
mold
Yep.
growth. So I
So
think that's
do you
important.
keep your house less than 50 or 40, or what's your goal?
I keep my house about 50%.
Humidity. Yep.
And that's like, I don't really like to see it higher than that. Sometimes like dead of summer, you'll see it get up to like 52%,
In
something around
Florida, that
there.
sounds pretty good, actually.
It is good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we have appropriately sized HVAC units. We've got appropriately sized ductwork. Actually, it's something I had to replace when I bought the house. And so that helps a lot because that's going to naturally control the amount of humidity. But sometimes in like the dead of summertime when it's super humid, or when it's raining, obviously, I probably need to kick on some of the supplemental dehumidifiers that I have, and they're
Mhm.
all set to just turn on when it needs to, which is
Sure.
basically I have it turn on at 50%. So by the most part, we're in that 50 to 55% range. Right now, it's beautiful out. I'm wearing sweaters, which in Florida is unheard of, and humidity is a lot less, and so it's nice, cool, breezy. So you don't have to worry about that this time of year, which is nice. But I'm sure no matter where you are, you can relate to the seasons and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and the changes in temperature and humidity, and it does make a big difference when the relative humidity is really high. You want to control that.
Totally. And I imagine the same is true for the dehumidifier. Like make sure that you can remove the parts and clean that because just like yeah, the dehumidifier is going to contain moisture and water as well. So yeah,
Exactly.
good points there. Okay, so you mentioned a lot of times mold is behind walls. So that's what's challenging for my patients, myself, as far as how do we figure that out? I mean, you could get a moisture meter, and I know you mentioned the thermal imaging or whatever that was called, but you could also get a moisture meter to figure out if there is moisture behind like a wall or whatnot. But um, how do individuals find that? How would they know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. You could get a moisture meter as well. Yeah, we didn't talk about moisture meter specifically, but the one downfall of moisture meters is if it's not actively wet, you're
It's
not
not
going to
going to read.
notice,
Yeah. Yep.
right? So I could have had, a leak that occurred, and
Mm-hmm.
then by the time my inspector comes out and uses moisture meters, maybe it's been a week or two, right? And maybe it's been dry. And all of a sudden that moisture meter is not going to show us where that leak was. That's why I said, we have different tools and technologies, right? But we want to actually we want to use everything to our advantage, looking outside and inside to kind of survey the property, because I would probably more likely find a subtle sign on the exterior that water's coming into that spot than I would find, a high moisture reading. There has to be like a substantial amount of moisture coming in, and there has to be something that traps that moisture for a high moisture reading. Or obviously you have to like time as well. If you catch it
Sure.
quickly, right after it rains or what have you, then maybe. But it's not always definitive, and so you want to use different tools and technologies to kind of understand. And so you're just looking for weak points where water could get in, and you're
Like
going to want to use
foundation
it.
cracks or something that,
Yeah,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
foundation cracks, maybe you've got some siding and you do like
Hmm.
a thorough investigation on the outside. You see like, some animal, started chipping away at the siding, or
Isn't
there's
there
a
supposed to be
gap,
something behind the siding though that's minimizing the moisture? I mean, supposed to
there
be.
is, there
I'm not a
is.
contractor. I don't understand any of this stuff. I'm slowly learning, but so there's supposed to be something there that's blocking the moisture from getting into the home, correct? Which could be
Correct.
compromised, but like there's supposed to be something there.
Supposed to be, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's many different reasons why a building leaks, right? There's supposed to be more, waterproofing product behind that. Like a tie deck or a house wrap, or
Yep.
there's a many different waterproofing products out there. There's supposed to be, but look, as the house settles and shifts, or
Hmm.
sometimes there, where the actual break or penetration is allows the water for some reason get behind the waterproofing barrier. Like there's 100
Things
different things that
happen.
can
Things
happen
happen.
in
Yeah.
variables, right? So
Sure.
you always want to be mindful of that. But look for, that's why you want to investigate, right? So if I see like a missing piece of siding, even if there's a waterproofing paper behind it, I'm going to say, hey, look, let's pull some of the siding off. Let's check. Let's
Mhm.
verify. Or, what we could do, we can go to the other side on the inside. We can drill a small hole through the wall. We could put like basically pull an air sample from behind that wall using that small little hole as a cavity. And that would tell us if we've got high mold levels there, then we know there has
Something's
to be water
penetrated
coming
through.
in,
Yeah,
right? And so
sure.
there are many ways to skin this cat, if you will, and figure out exactly what's going on and how bad it is and how fast you should react to it. But it does require critical thinking. It does require different tools and technologies and figuring out the least invasive way or the most cost
Mhm.
effective way to help this person identify what's going on and getting them the data that they need so they can make the best educated decision. I feel like a lot of experts over the years, I hate to be critical of people, but I feel like where the problems really lie in this field, why so many people call different inspectors or different companies and have trouble getting the similar results, is we have some laziness, right? That air sample thing that air sample technology was like a gift and a curse to the industry. It made everybody lazy. They just want to set up this thing, this tripod in the center of the room, and just take an air sample. They do 3 of those. They're more likely than not to tell you good news. I didn't find anything, which means no real work for them. That disregarded all the technologies. I've had to call inspectors for clients that just needed my help and said, hey, are you going to use thermal imaging camera? Are you going to use moisture meters? Well, no, but I could. Well, what are you going to do then? Well, I'm going to take some air samples. So it's like, there's this laziness that has been created out of that technology, and people now are misusing the technology as a result. And you also have this level of this lack of critical thinking where people start to make assumptions based upon maybe houses they've been to where there were different scenarios, but no house is the same. No builder builds the house the same. There's an umpteen amount of variables that can occur, and so each time you really need to look at it like, okay, I can't tell you how many times where I'm like, look, it's either X, Y, or Z, right? These are the variables. It could be X, could be Y, could be Z. I don't tell people it's definitely X just because it's been X before, because it could be Y and it also could be Z. And so I think it's really important that critical thinking re-enters the space, and that, and also I think as a homeowner, I might not know everything about a house, right? But I have a pretty good intuition when someone's talking to me about something and it doesn't make sense. You're like, that doesn't make sense. You need to trust your gut intuition and don't be afraid to ask questions. Well,
Mhm.
why is it that way? Well, couldn't it also be X, Y, or Z, right? And I think through that process, you're going to have a lot better accessibility to the right people, because unfortunately, I can't tell you how many people have just trusted anybody they found on, Facebook or Google or what have you, and that have given them bad advice. And that bad advice has led to them spending money and not getting the result that they really wanted. And, we're talking about something that affects your health, your quality of life. It's really important to do so. And so hopefully listening to some of these tools and technologies and
Mhm.
some of this advice, you're in a better position than you were, before this episode launched.
Okay, I want to get into why listeners should find a good inspector, and I want to get into the limitations of air testing, but I still have questions based on what you previously said. So I want to come back to crawl space. So why are crawl spaces and basements in general so dangerous? Or yeah, tell me your opinion on those.
Most of the time because they're underground. Sometimes crawl spaces are above ground, but most of the time they're underground. Basements, sometimes you have a walkout basement and part of it's above ground, but most of the time they're underground. And being underground, you're constantly exposed to the elements. I mean, every time it rains, water obviously collects into the soil. It's looking to go somewhere and it's looking for the path of least resistance. If that path of least resistance is in your basement or crawl space, guess what? You're going to have water. And where you have water, you have life. And where you have life, you're going to have pests. You're going to have rodents. You're going to have mold, and you're going to have bacteria. So you want to really look at it from that standpoint. Those are very weak points that you could have poor contaminants and microbiological contaminants at that, creating and affecting the air quality inside. So a lot of people say, well, if it's in my basement, it's in my crawl space, at least it's not on my first floor. Well, I hate to tell you this, but 30% of the air that you breathe comes from the lowest point of your house. So basically, it is
It
in your
is.
house. It is in your first floor. And
Yep.
so, we have to remember air typically rises, right? And those particles that are going to be in the air are going to rise with it. And so, we think people say, well, then I'll just seal my crawl space. I'll just seal my basement. Listen, there's nothing that's going to help you hermetically seal anything. And even if there was, it would be breaking down over time. And so I think spending good money after bad ideas probably isn't going to cut it. But what you could do is you could remove the contaminants and actually improve the environment so that those contaminants don't thrive there anymore. And you can do that with dehumidification. You can do that with ventilation. You can do that with, vapor barriers and, proper solutions to control the amount of moisture coming into those spaces. And if you do that, you're going to have a healthy home.
Yeah, you speak so well on this. Okay, that's why you're on the show. That's why you're the guest. I mentioned before we started recording that I previously had Brian Carr on the show. That was episodes 179 and 180 for the listeners. So I highly encourage you to check those out. And he did a wonderful job explaining strengths and limitations of air testing or sampling versus dust testing, whatnot. But I want to ask your opinion because I like hearing from different people. You kind of already started talking about or air testing. And I do feel like there's value if we're looking at a cavity, like you're saying, drilling a hole to figure out if behind the wall there is something there. And then clearly just air testing in the middle of a huge room isn't probably going to tell us much unless we know that's in close proximity to where the water damage was. But tell me where you find use with air testing, the limitations, and then what the better alternative is.
Yeah, I think it's very useful in actually identifying a source. I think, but you have to understand it only works if you're going to test very close to where you suspect that source is, right? And so if I think there's a problem in the corner of a structure, I want to test as close to that corner as possible. The further away that I test, the more likely it is to make it look like it's not really a problem at all.
Sure.
I can't tell you how many times, somebody's taken an air sample in the center of the room and the air sample is worse than outside. And yet they're like, oh, it's no issue here because it's not that bad. Well, not that bad compared to what? When it's elevated, right, from outside, that something in the vicinity is growing. So all that means is had you taken the sample closer to where the problem really was, usually on an exterior wall because of windows or doors or roofs that are leaking or exteriors that are leaking, or on an interior plumbing wall where there could have been, a pipe leak or something. If you've went closer to that, what you would have found was more mold, right? So it's all relative, right? The further away you take it, the more likely you are for it to look normal. It has to be really, really bad and really pervasive, for the center of the room to kind of read off the charts, right? And I've seen that happen before, believe me, but it's very rare. So I think air testing's great when it's used properly. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes people don't use it properly. I think that's my biggest gripe with the technology.
Okay, so what's the better alternative, in your opinion? Yeah.
Well, so the better alternative for the way in which air testing sometimes is misused, it's sometimes misused as a screening tool. It is not a screening tool. When you take an air test in the center of the room, what you're actually trying to accomplish is you're trying to screen the room. I've heard inspectors say, well, that's about where the bed was and that's about where they sleep. And so I took it at that height.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's great. So when they're sleeping, they're not exposed to that much. But when they're sitting at their desk working, which is a few feet away, right behind where that problem is, guess what? They're getting exposed quite a bit more, right? And so that's why it's so important, like the location of where you test. So as a screening tool, it's terrible. And the reason being is because it's really collecting 75 milliliters of air. It's not a lot of air. The dust that's already in the air is too large to fit inside the cassette, which is the testing apparatus that gets sent to the lab, and they collects everything under this slide. They put the slide in the microscope. They're looking and for mold. They're counting how much mold's there.
Aren't they just looking at spores? I mean,
they're just looking at spores,
yeah,
right?
That's it. Yeah. Okay.
So if the dust is too big to fit inside the cassette, then any spores attached to the dust is not going to get counted, right? In this specific test. Now, why is that important? Well, if there's a great YouTube video for mold. I'm gonna put in the chat when we're done, and you're gonna put in the show notes because everyone needs to see this. there's this video that shows a colony of mold underneath a microscope, and it's just spitting out spores like a volcano erupting lava, like just continuously, ad nauseum. Again, it's all it does, never stops. Now, think about these tiny, tiny, tiny spores, about 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can see. Yes, a mold spore is 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can see. You need a microscope to see it. These spores, they're constantly spewed out of this source of organism. Okay. They're going to attach to particles already in the air, like your dust. You ever sat near a window on a sunny day? You saw a ray of light refract off the
Mm-hmm.
dust, and you're like,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of
Whoa.
dust. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these isolated spores attach to the dust already. Okay. When they do that, they now become part of the dust. Now, when I take an air sample and the dust can't fit inside of it, I'm missing essentially all of the potential spores that are already attached to the dust, not on top of viruses and bacteria, everything you can imagine. It's all kind of becomes one with the dust. So the better way to screen what you're being exposed to in a specific room or a specific floor, or however you want to break down the environment,
Mm-hmm.
would be to test the dust, which is one of the main reasons why I helped develop a product called the dust test. And it's really because so many people start with, well, if I want to answer this question, do I have mold? And I want to know it in a scientific way, let me just take some air samples around the house. That's a horrible idea, because if you take it in the wrong location, it may give you a false sense of security. But now, if you test your dust as a screening tool to understand what you're actually being exposed to, one of the most effective things you can do, because you'll notice, and if you don't believe me and you just want to do this for science, do a dust test in a room and then do an air test in the room. Look at the result difference. It's mind blowing.
It is. I have. Yep, I agree. Yep. Yep. Oh boy. Okay. So where do I go? I had so many questions. Let me kind of go back to, so we're talking about the best way to test being the dust test. So tell us what the dust test is specifically looking for on that analysis. I mean, we've talked a little bit about, obviously Brian talked about the dust test too, but I've talked about an ERMI previously on the show as well. So what is that dust test specifically showing on on the report?
So specifically, what it's showing on the report, if you've ever done an ERMI, you'd probably notice a pretty big similarity. The technology is exactly the same. It's MSQ PCR technology. It is looking at the DNA of what is there. So it's really it's a sensitive test. You're really looking at the DNA of what's there. So it's going to tell you how many particles per milligram of dust of 36 different species of mold. And these 36 different species of mold have been carefully curated by the EPA, who did their joint study with HUD, the American Healthy Home Survey 1 and 2, which the data is essentially based upon. And what we've been able to do with this test is understand what normal looks like, right? Because we have to understand that all homes are going to have some level of mold. What we don't want to have in our homes is an overgrowth of mold. Let me give you an example really quickly. If you inhale some dust, probably not a big deal, right? If I put you in a dust storm, though, you're probably going to be coughing out a lung, probably going to develop some level of illness because you're just too much dust. Your body's not able to get rid of it quickly enough. So therefore, we want to have some level of mold. We don't want to have a crazy overgrowth of mold. Now, with that being said, if I have too much mold in my environment, I'm going to be able to tell, because when I do a dust test, it's going to tell me if I have, Stachybotrys or Aspergillus, penicillioids, or different species of penicillium. And it's going to tell us, is this average? Is it 10 times higher than average, 100 times higher than average, or 1,000 times higher than average? Now, what I look at, anything that's 10 times higher, I tell people, don't freak out. 10 times is not, we're dealing with something so small. 10 times is not something that you need to panic. Here's some different steps we can take to minimize the amount of mold we're breathing in. Let's get those numbers lower. But when I start seeing 100 times, 1,000 times, now I'm like, all right, we've got a significant source somewhere, right? We've got a lot of these particles present. You got to remember it's per milligram of dust. So think about like how much dust, has been collected, how much dust has been analyzed, and kind of look at that from across the area. Obviously, the further away from the source you get, the lower the numbers would be, the closer, the higher the numbers. So you want to look at it as an average, right? If we have too much on average, then that means we have a source significantly somewhere nearby that's creating these particles that are spreading and distributing across the house. Like the HVAC is a pretty big suspect for this type of occurrence. when I look at all these different species of molds, and I'm looking at all these averages, I'm able to actually understand a little bit of a picture of what I think might be happening. If I'm seeing Aspergillus or Penicillium off the charts, but I'm not really seeing Cotomium or Stachybotrys, which that tells me those two molds would tell me that there's definitely a long-standing leak. Those molds definitely require a lot more moisture or water. You're not just going to get it from a little bit of humidity.
Sure.
When I start seeing like Aspergillus, Penicillium without those toxigenic molds that require a lot more water, I'm going to be looking at, okay, let's take a look at the HVAC. Do we have a mold problem in the attic? Is there a basement or crawl space in the property? Me looking at things that are a little bit more prone to moisture, right? And when I have these long-standing leak molds, I'm going to be asking questions like, any leaks you're aware of? I can't tell you how often, you listening to this, knowing you already know what's wrong with your house, like 9 times out of 10. You're like, yeah, I had a leak here and a leak there and a leak here. And you're gonna try to tell me that, you did the best that you could at the time. And, the contractor seemed like a great person and like they were very knowledgeable. Everybody goes through this phase with me where they're like, yeah, I know about it. I know about all the problems, but I promise it was taken care of to the best of my ability. Well, look, you have to realize to the best of my ability, prior to me being 25 years old, was throw some bleach on it and paint over it. Because growing up, that was what you were told to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to the best of your ability might be pretty similar. And also we have to realize none of us really understood like the importance of air quality circa like nowish, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so what ends up happening is a lot of us like we just let somebody, we had some water damage. I called my insurance company. They came over, they took care of it. I think they took care of it. I think I saw some plastic. I'm not really sure, right? You didn't pay much attention to it. And so it's okay, but just know that even if it was remediated, if it wasn't remediated properly and it wasn't verified and it wasn't post tested, I promise you, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that old place that you thought was fixed that wasn't actually fixed and it's still creating a problem. And one thing that's going to go through your mind is, well, Michael, but the roof leak's repaired. That's fine. That's repaired. So it's not continuously growing. Right. But even though the roof leak's repaired, that mold colony is there because it was never properly removed. And guess what? Every summer when it's humid as heck outside, there's going to be enough humidity in that attic, right? Where that mold is growing to allow it to continue to grow and foster and stay alive. In the wintertime, it might go dormant, it might relax, might not be producing as many particles or toxins, but comes rolling right back once we get some nice humidity going. And so we have to remember, if we had mold, I don't care if it was 40 years ago, we still have it unless we remove it. And that's like a really important thing that people don't realize. And it's not till I start to have these consultations with people that they go, oh my God, yeah, I've got like 10 different spots that I can tell you right away. And so trust your gut, trust your intuition. Mm-hmm. It's usually not this big, well-kept secret. You typically know what the problems are. But you just have to realize that, they're problems and they need to be addressed.
Yeah, totally. Well said. Okay, so I know the listeners are thinking, okay, so then what though? So we do the dust test. Well, we're listening to our intuition. We think, oh, I did have these couple leaks, maybe weren't remediated appropriately. Do a dust test. In essence, fail the dust test. And I mean, it suggests there's still a problem. Then what? So that's where a good mold inspector comes in to use all the tools
Correct.
you keep mentioning. So how does one find a good mold inspector?
Hope, an ice
Pray.
cold beer, a prayer. I don't, it's really difficult. It really is. I have this problem all the time. People from all over the country are asking me for help. Where do I find people? It's you have to
You should
ask.
start a training program, shouldn't it?
It's you have to be able to like ask a couple different questions. You have to be willing. You have to kind of almost like come in with a battle plan. Okay. First question I'd probably ask them, hey, how long is this inspection going to take? Somebody says, oh, don't worry, I'll be in and out an hour or two. No. You don't want that. You want someone who's going to like thoroughly look through your house. I mean, think about when you're buying a home, like a home inspection, it takes like 4+ hours, right? They're going through like every nook and cranny trying to find anything wrong with the home. I mean, some of those guys and gals, they do a great job, really going through like a fine tooth comb. That's what you want. but they're looking for signs of water damage. And then they're validating that water damage to see if there's mold there. So think about, that's like question number one. How long is this going to take? And if they tell you it's going to be quick, be like, okay, next, not going to happen. Second thing that I'd probably ask is like, how do you plan to investigate this home? Like, what sort of tools are you going to use? What sort of testing are you going to do? What sort of testing technologies are you going to, use? And you want to hear more than I'm just going to take a couple of air samples, because they're just going to take a couple of air samples and they're not going to do a thorough investigation of the home. They're not going to tell you what you need. And, maybe some people listening out there, they want to just hear like, I don't have a problem, just because it feels good to not have a problem. But to be honest, if you're doing this for health reasons, you actually want to find problems with your home, because I'm going to tell you this, no home is perfect.
Yeah.
Because we want to have an opportunity to fix those problems. And then the outcome that you're looking for is that you fix those problems, and that because of that, you breathe better. And because you breathe better, you feel better. Right. And so, we want to change the frame of mind around this. We want somebody who's going to be Inspector Gadget, going through using everything they possibly can to help find these problems. I mean, you've mentioned Brian Carr a few times. They do a great job at that, but I would say I can count on two hands, like the people that I would have in my own home that I would recommend, out of 50,000 companies. And not to say that I haven't met all 50,000 people, right? But it's like, over years, it's really difficult to add people to that list. Matter of fact, it's a lot easier to remove people from the list than to add them. So, we've definitely got a lot to do in terms of fixing that industry. But it's ask the right questions.
Yeah, that was good.
And like, use your intuition. Like, is this a person that is going to go to war for me and find all my problems? Or is this a person that just wants to make a quick buck? And you have to decipher that.
So that's where, again, like We Inspect, which is Brian Carr's, if I'm saying this right, company, could come in, because they can do inspections. Okay.
Yes.
So once the inspection is done, then the remediation has to happen. Correct. So how does someone find a good remediator? Same thing.
Same questions. Yeah. So with remediation, it'd be like, all right, how long should this remediation take? Right. And so obviously when you get an inspection done, they're going to show you, maybe I've got 5 different problems with my house. Right. Now, those 5 problems now need to be rectified and resolved and remediated properly. And they need to be remediated in such a way that the mold's not going to come back. They also need to be remediated in such a way that the mold's actually going to be removed. And it all needs to be validated with post-testing. So if you hired We Inspect, you'd bring them back after the fact to come back and reassess, sure, right? And post-test, because I don't care if you're the best, remediator on the planet. We're dealing with something that's 25 to 50 times smaller than what the eye can see. So we need science to help us validate that, that we've got it all, right? And it's, like people look at it as like passing and failing. I mean, you could look at it that way if you want, but it's really just a matter of, did we remove all of it, or do we need to roll up our sleeves some more and remove some more? And, and that's what the science helps us understand. And that's how the process should be done, no matter who you are, right? I developed a company called HomeCleanse back in 2017. It still exists today. I'm chairman of the board at that company. I'm not the CEO. I don't run the day-to-day operations, but I can tell you that every policy that I put into effect at that company is still in existence today. It's a phenomenal company, and they do above and beyond to make sure that your house is remediated properly. They work with pretty much any budget. I've seen, remediations being done for like $5,000 all the way up to like $500,000. And so whether you have a tiny house, massive house, they have a program for you, and it's all data driven off of results, right? And so you need data. You can't just be like, I have a little bit of mold on my wall. Can you come and take a look? That's not the company. I would hopefully never, no matter what happens, hopefully that never happens. But the reality of it is looking at scientifically understanding your home, making sure you have the right information to then go and holistically improve the quality of air that you're breathing. So that's what that company does. And remediation is a massive part of that, but it also is, it's a product company as well. And so it's constantly curating the best products out there to make sure that you have good filtration, good air purification, good cleaning products. I mean, you name it. And so I think it's like the whole home health solutions company. Think of it as like Amazon for your house that has like a, person that comes in and installs everything. That's kind of what it does. And so, it's tough to find good remediation companies. When I was doing this for my dad back in the day, I literally had to come in and remediate homes that were already remediated by Hurricane Sandy. And I had to figure out, well, why are these homes remediated, but people are still getting sick? Why aren't they remediating, in a way where scientifically it's improved? And
Can
I think
you,
it's, oh,
I'm interrupting you, but can you say for the listeners very quickly just some of the reasons that those sort of remediations have failed? Not that we've had a hurricane here in Iowa, but we've had a land hurricane, which is called a derecho. So we have been somewhat affected, and I'm just curious, like what you found in those instances.
yeah. So I would say the top two reasons why remediation fails, actually, probably three. Number one, they didn't fully remove it. I mean, there are companies that just come in and paint over it. There are companies that come in and use like they rely on biocides and chemicals to like kill it. And then they just kind of like, paint over it from there. And if you're not actually removing the roots called hyphae from building materials, if you're not actually improving the environment so that whatever allowed the mold to grow in the first place is resolved, it's coming back. I don't care what you use or how you do it. And so that was a big fundamental issue that people thought. I mean, if you ever hired a remediation company, not many people sound the way I sound right now. It's a very construction like field, and so you're gonna get the typical brute guy who's gonna tell you it's no big deal. I can't imagine why anyone would be in a field that doesn't believe mold is a big deal when they remove mold for a living, but I run into it every day, right? And so you have to understand that like the science behind mold has been really not taught well in that
Hmm.
construction field. And so it's been a
Sure.
very cosmetic, you rip it out, you throw it away, you pour some chemicals, that's it. So there was that whole aspect to deal with. The second thing is, and this was like even when I was going to these like schools to get my certifications, they didn't talk much about like the byproducts that mold creates. So as an organism, and we're going to go back to that video that's going to be in the show notes, and you're going to see how it reproduces under a microscope. Well, with that, with those spores, it's producing toxins too, if it as a self-defense mechanism against other molds. And so you didn't hear about what do you do about the spores that have spread throughout the house as long as the mold's been there. You didn't hear about what do you do about the mycotoxins, right? So here I am finding all of this out because I'm looking at like the data. I'm like, well, what happens to all these spores, right? They're all across the house. I mean, the first project I ever did, the woman had a carpet of black mold behind the drywall, not in front of it. Couldn't see it from the front of the wall, behind the drywall. And it was right behind the HVAC system. So it was obviously getting
Oh my
drawn up
gosh.
into the HVAC
Yeah.
system and dispersed. There was no industry standard on what to do with the HVAC system. There was no like, you have to clean the HVAC system. The insurance company was like, we're not paying for that. That's crazy. Why would we do that? Who would do that? And I'm like, well, what else do you do? I mean, it's in there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so like I was like banging my head against the wall. Here I am. I'm not a microbiologist. I was barely even a restoration guy at this point. I happen to know about buildings because of being around my dad my entire life, growing up and like literally helping my dad through summers and weekends and stuff like that. And I'm asking questions like, hey,
You
this
had some
doesn't really
common
make
sense.
sense.
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
enough common
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
to be like, why would we do it this way? Why not do this? What about all these other things, right? And when I asked this class, I'll never forget. You know what the teacher told me? Teacher was like, you don't need to worry about that. You shouldn't even mention the word mycotoxins. Why are you asking about mycotoxins? She shouldn't even mentioning that. That's what the teacher told me. The teacher that gave me my
The
my
certification.
my certification.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
You don't need to worry about that. That's not a thing. Because I was like, hey, I did this process and I removed some mycotoxins, and I would love to hear your thoughts. And he was like, you shouldn't be saying anything like that. Okay, you can get yourself in trouble. I was like, well, get trouble for what? So this is like what I grew up in, right? And so it's asking all these questions. So the byproducts of molds, another problem, right? Molds in my basement, it gets across my house, it's in my HVAC. Well, guess what? If I don't clean my HVAC, if I don't put better filters on my HVAC, if I don't clean up my house and remove a bunch of dust that's circulating and harboring all these contaminants, guess what? It's still going to be affecting me. So how many people have had their house quote unquote remediated, but still felt the mold that was there? Because even if they did the best job in your basement, if you didn't look at your HVAC system, if you didn't remove the dust from across the house, if you didn't clean your belongings, I mean, look, it's a very invasive thing. If you didn't do all these other steps, well, guess what? You are still breathing all of that stuff in because it never left your environment. You just stopped the source, which is a big, important part of it. But if you didn't remove the byproducts, well, you're still not going to feel well. And so I went through, I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to clean homes 3 or 4 times to remove mycotoxins, to remove mold spores down to a normal level, and like understand the process, and then be able to teach people how to do it, right? Because that was the other thing. It's like, okay, it's too costly to do this as a company. How do we teach people how to clean their homes properly after they remove the mold? That's a big thing. And so that was kind of that trial and error process. And I think the last thing why remediations fail, another important part of it, is because they didn't know where the mold was in the first place. Inspector came in, took 3 air samples, said, I think
ever
mold's
found
over
it.
here.
Yeah.
Maybe found like one problem, but like missed 10 others. And so how could you possibly get better or feel better or make sure that your house is healthier if you don't know where the problems are, right? And so I think it's like having the right data, very important part. Removing the mold properly, very important part. And then like removing the byproducts. And if you don't have all 3, you could spend money, but you don't actually feel better. And that's a sad endeavor that a lot of people get themselves into.
Very thorough answer. Thank you. Okay, so for the listeners, we can test. You can have an inspection. You can do the dust test. You can hire a company like HomeCleanse. I mean, your website is literally homecleanse.com, right?
Cleanse your home,
Yeah. To do the remediation. I obviously everything you just said trickled even more questions though, because after the fact, we want to make sure that mold doesn't return as far as like there are strategies we can implement, like you were saying, keeping the humidity down. And I think in general, we do need to have good air filtration going in our home. So then I want to ask, like, from an air purifier standpoint, which I'm assuming you sell these on your HomeCleanse website too, what air purifiers you recommend? And you had mentioned it's really important to clean the home. So are there some best cleaning products you think will help improve? Will kind of get rid of if you're cleaning the dust that has the mycotoxins and all those byproducts, the company that mold keeps, like, how do we clean that and kill that? Which maybe begs another question, the difference between killing things and removing things in the air. But how do we clean? And then how do we filter the air? I guess those are the next 2 questions.
Yeah. So you filter the air through different strategies. One of the biggest things that I love to see on people's homes, I have in my home, is what's called the IntelliPure Super V. It's a MERV 16 filter, goes on the HVAC unit. It's electronically charged, can get particles as small as 7 nanometers at a pretty high efficiency, better than HEPA. It's great. It's a $2,500 piece of equipment. So, not everybody can afford it, especially if you're like renting. You can't modify your HVAC system for that to go into. It's certainly, if you do the math though, like it is actually cheaper in the long run than like the box filters you would buy at Home Depot, because that filter lasts 1.5 to 3 years. And so, it's the filter replacement costs are a fraction of what it costs to buy the unit and install it, because it's got a whole like electronic apparatus. And then once you buy that and you buy the first filter replacement, and then you do the math, divide that by like 3 years, it's cheaper than buying cheap filters at Home Depot, Lowe's, or wherever you buy your filters at. And 1.5 to 3 years, pretty low maintenance. I mean, I know there's some people out there right now that are listening to this that get those box filters and haven't changed it every 3 months like they're supposed to. So think about, from this perspective, the less you have to maintain, the easier it is to live life, right? Yep. And unfortunately, maintenance is such a huge, important part of the process, because if you don't maintain your home properly, you're likely to have mold and bacteria. And so I always look for what can we do to maintain things a little bit less, have a little bit easier time, and get better protected. That HVAC filter is definitely an important part of, it's part of every pitch I have. It's just because I like the unit. I think it does a great job. There are air purifiers too, right? And so that kind of turns my HVAC systems into air purifiers. if you walk across my home, you'll probably find like 17 different brands of air purifiers, and that's because people just keep sending me stuff to try. I like whatever's the cheapest that has the best filter in it. That's what I like because honestly, I don't care about the bells and whistles. I don't need to have like a $5,000 air purifier. Believe me, there's ones that are $10,000 and more, and they've got all these bells and whistles and do all these crazy things and connect to my Wi-Fi and order filters for me. Like I'm sure there's going to be
Yeah.
AI ones
Yeah. Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out soon. Okay. There's going to be no shortage of stuff that's going to be thrown at you to sell you. What you care about is how small of a particle can it remove. And there are air purifiers that do a great job at $100 out there or even less. And so go to homecleanse.com, do some research. We've got different tiered stuff there. These are all products that I've physically tested, that I physically tried, and I know work and do a good job.
But what
But
diameter should they filter down to? Like, what's the?
I mean, pretty much HEPA's at 0.3, so anything should be getting down at 0.3 at 99% or better. I think the compact for like $99 will do that. Great. For $99, you really can't beat that, right? There are ones that go smaller, right? Like the IntelliPure makes an ultra fine one that gets down to like zero point 0.7 nanometers again, that DFS technology. It's great. It's going to be a little pricier at like $400, right? And so there are different price points that will get you to smaller particles, but it really depends on your budget.
Sure.
If your budget is $500, I'm probably going to tell you go buy 5 compacts so you have more air purifiers around your place, right? Then buy one of these big machines. Now, if your budget's 5,000, I'll say good. You could afford the better quality machines and you can buy more of them. But it depends on what your budget is. Don't break the bank and buy just one when you might need a couple more to really filter the air across your house. Go for, the better, go for the more efficiency with the more units that you can have that are filtering out particles a lot better, because they're all, if you look at any of the manufactured products, they're all going to tell you this is good for, 100 square feet or 1,000 square feet. And so pay attention to that.
Okay, cleaning products. I know we've gone a long time here, so I'll try to wrap up the last couple of questions. E3, a lot of my patients have used that. How do you feel about E3, hydrogen peroxide, borax? Like, are you pro or for or against these? Tell me what do you think about those sort of cleaning products?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm pretty much for everything that is going in the way anyone that's trying to make products that are safer for human and pets. I'm all for that. So you have EC3. I love EC3. I recommend EC3. You'll find EC3 laundry additive on the HomeCleanse website. Probably the best laundry additive you could possibly get that will target mold and mycotoxins. Yeah, I've heard
For
people
in the
have
washing
success.
machine? Like in the
Goes in
washing
the
machine?
washing
Yeah,
machine.
yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. Okay.
amazing. I've had people have success with borax too. I mean, borax is pretty harsh. It's what detergent is typically made out of, right? For most of your detergents, but it could be harsh on its own, and so it just depends. Some people can be sensitive to that. Some people aren't. EC3 typically everybody can tolerate. And then like for cleaning your house, I mean, there's a ton of amazing things. Like Benefact Decon 30 is great because it's a ready to use product. It's got a great surfactant ratio to disinfectant. EC3 also makes like a mold concentrate that you can kind of mix in with you follow the directions, you mix it in with water. Also is effective disinfectant. I try to stay away from things that are trying to kill products. So, there's all these products in the marketplace that are like, this will kill mold. Okay, well, what does that mean? If you go on the EPA's website and you type in, should I use bleach to remove mold? They've got a whole new page. 10 years ago, they told you use bleach. They thankfully realized that that's not the best, most effective product to use. They've got this new statement on their website. You shouldn't use bleach to use mold, and you shouldn't use anything to kill mold, because even dead mold can cause an allergic reaction in some. Now, I don't really appreciate the word allergic here in this context, but the main thing is, first off, like a spore is not really alive, like a seed, right? Before it becomes a plant, is a seed alive? I don't think so, right? It's not really alive. Once it mixes with water and it's in the right conditions, it starts to grow and starts to become alive, right? So I think trying to kill mold when it's not actually alive in the first place, in the context and typically in which the way it's used, I don't think is an effective strategy. The second thing is, now let's say you're using it on the colony, right? The part that is alive. Well, if I kill that, right, It also has roots that grow into things. So, A, it's going to grow right back, especially if the conditions that haven't been fixed allowed it to grow in the first place, right? The second thing is, where does it all go? I mean, if I went out and used like a weed killer in my backyard right now and I killed a bunch of weeds, we're going to see a bunch of shriveled up, dead like plants sitting in my lawn now. I mean, it just doesn't disappear, right? It doesn't just like vanish. And so now I've got all this, mold particles that are probably even smaller than what they once were because now they're brittle and broken apart. And so now maybe I would have been breathing in like 100 spores per cubic meter. Maybe now I'm breathing in like a million fragments, right? Like we just don't know enough about all the different chemical changes that take place.
Sure.
And these companies to really get that kill claim, all they have to show is that there's been a change in the DNA, right? And so, yeah, maybe there's a change, but there's still going to be a particle present. There's like a whole big scientific, explanation of a particle cannot be created nor destroyed. It just breaks apart into smaller and smaller particles. So what does that do to the human body? I don't think it does good things to us. So I try to focus more on let's just remove it. It's the safest thing because we know if it's removed and gone, then it's removed and gone, and we're not breathing in something else that has been changed, altered, that could continuously keep us sick.
Yeah, no one's mentioned that on the podcast. That was good. You mentioned you had to remediate or do something with your home. This may be $1 million question that we can't answer in a few short minutes here, but do you believe that building is better than buying an existing home? I guess I would like to build a non-toxic home in the next 5 years, and I'm very paranoid. Even at the homes we've looked at, I just am that have been in existence, a decade or whatnot. I'm very, very concerned and slightly paranoid. I will fully admit that that they may have had water damage, right? That no one's disclosed. So you just don't know what you're getting into, and you have a lot of knowledge, so you could probably enter a home and maybe be able to survey the the situation and kind of know what you're purchasing. But for an average consumer who may not have all this knowledge, well, clearly a lot more after listening today, but do you feel like purchasing an existing home or building is better?
So, well,
Maybe you have a whole blog on this. I don't know.
so I'm in my third house. This house is a house that I purchased, remodeled, remediated. Had to remediate it again, but the other two houses purchased, remodeled, and remediated. I did try to build a home. It ended in a lawsuit.
Oh no.
And needless to say, I'm not in that house. And was fortunate enough to, kind of resolve things amicably through the justice system, which was really nice.
But was that before you had all this knowledge?
No, it
No,
was with the knowledge. Yeah. Yeah. I can't talk a lot about
of
all
course.
the details, of course, but
What can go wrong with a big build, like with a new build? I mean, just speaking generally, not about your specific situation,
yeah.
but like, are there bigger opportunities for things to go wrong with fresh builds or?
So, I mean, there's a couple different things. The way we build houses today, like they're thrown up in 3 to 6 months. It used to take 2 years to build a house, right? And so, obviously, the construction boom has, there's been some advancements, there's been some corner cutting, but a lot can go wrong. And two things that I'd probably worry about the most is there's amazing structural building components association's guide for building a wood truss home, which many homes are built out of today. And it talks about elevating the lumber out of the soil and keeping it wrapped in plastic, but leaving the ends open for ventilation. Drive around America right now. You won't see any builder following those guidelines. You're going to see lumber sitting dead smack in the soil. Do you know what the soil is abundant of? Mold and bacteria. Abundant. And so if I put lumber in the soil and it rains and it stays wet for more than 24 to 48 hours, guess what I have on that lumber? Mold and bacteria.
Which no one would know. You would never know. Like that which makes me nervous about even an existing home though. Right? That could have been built in that fashion, like that the wood could have gotten wet or whatnot.
Sure. But we use better lumber. Like if you look at a home from 50 years ago and you just demolish a wall on an interior wall on a new home versus an old home, the color of the wood doesn't even look the same. We use like real wood, real raw wood
Back then, you're
back
saying, but
then.
yeah, yeah, okay.
Today it's like we cut a lot of corners. The wood's not even the right size. I mean, it used to be a 2x4. You know why we called it a 2x4? It was 2 inches by 4 inches. A 2x4 today is not 2 inches by 4 inches. It's like an inch and a half to like 3.5 inches. Like the way in which there's a lot of glues used. Like there's just the way in which we build today. We've tried to cut costs. We've tried to get more affordable. And, the corners in which we've cut have led to some issues. So we have that. We have vapor barriers. If vapor barriers aren't done properly,
I don't even know what that is, but
so that's a vapor barrier goes underneath the slab foundation that's poured.
okay.
That's true whether you have a basement or not, or you're on slab on grade, because you need a vapor barrier that stops water from penetrating into the cement. Well, if vapor barriers aren't done properly, if there's rips, tears, gaps in the vapor barrier, if they don't use the right tape, like a polyethylene tape to bond the vapor barrier to one another, when they cut holes for electric and plumbing, if they don't seal those properly, a lot can go wrong in a vapor barrier that allows moisture to intrude. So, if you start seeing like signs of moisture intrusion in the slab itself, that's a pretty big problem. If you have mold growth all throughout your lumber as the house is being built because the lumber wasn't stored properly,
right,
it's going to be a pretty big problem. Now, I can't tell you how many builders have told me, literally to my face, as if I didn't do this for a living or something, that don't worry, once we put the insulation and drywall up, like the mold will be gone. It can't get in front of the drywall. Well, I've got tests to prove
lies, all lies.
That specific mold that was behind the wall not only got in front of it because we tested the dust, but also it's in the HVAC system now. Mm-hmm. Because what does the HVAC system do? It draws air into it, conditions it, supplies it back out. Well, it's got an evaporator coil. That evaporator coil condensates 24/7 while it's removing the moisture. That's why we have drip pans and drains that take the water outside of our house. So all that water allows for something like mold and bacteria to grow once it makes contact with that water, which is what we have. And then, of course, mold needs like a food supply. We have an endless food supply. You have dead hair and skin cells, all this dust that gets into the HVAC system over time. Mold feeds off that stuff. And so it's got some really good places to live in a new construction home as well. And so, this misnomer of like, oh, it's fine if I buy a new house, mold doesn't exist in new houses, only in old houses. That's not true, unfortunately. And, I wanted to build a house, really, I was looking forward to it. Unfortunately, I thought I found someone with the best reputation I could find. Unfortunately, like mold is such a interesting subject in the new build community. It's like, I don't know if they tell people lies or if they actually believe the crap that's coming out of their mouth, but I'll tell you what they're saying to people to make people feel okay about, problems errors in which they've made. It really
is a crime. Is a crime. Yeah.
It is a crime. And it's concerning. And it makes it so that, where do you go? Right. So my philosophy is, and what I've done, buy houses, do extensive testing on them, figure out where all the problems are, remediate them, and move in. And, not a lot of people can afford to do that. I totally understand that. Obviously it's a little easier for me because I have, the connections and stuff. And so I might not pay full retail on everything, to be blunt about it. But at the end of the day, it's still an expense.
Yeah.
We spent a pretty penny, even with discounts, on this house to fix it up and move into it. I'm grateful. We love it. Our kids are happy. They're thriving in here. The air quality is amazing, but it was a project. It took me 4 months. And that was after like 2 years of being in limbo, dealing with this whole litigation phase of, just like trying to move on with my life. And so, look, I don't want to dissuade people from buying new houses. Like, I think if you're going to do that, you need to know what to look for, and be careful and, put your foot down when you see something that's not going according to plan. And we have the legal system that helps support us when we need it. That's why we have justice system.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
sometimes people need justice. And that it is what it is. But personally, I've had a lot of success buying houses, renovating them. Foreclosures aren't really much of a thing these days with COVID, coming out of COVID. But back in the day, there was always a supply of foreclosures. And I always try to get the best deal on a house because I knew I was going to gut it anyway, and as that comes back, that will make things more, feasible and affordable for people, but they're going to have to just put together the right team of
Mhm.
inspection and remediation and
Yep.
all the different pieces to make sure that when they go through it, it makes financial sense and it actually is going to be effective.
Wow, awesome, awesome. Okay, Mikey, just kidding. Michael, tell us tell us where our listeners can find you, your company, and all of the cleaning products, the air filtration devices, a lot of the things that you've mentioned on the show today.
All right. So if you need help with your house as a product or service, go to homecleanse.com. All the amazing products that I know work are there. Pretty much we're trying to curate anything that's home health related, go there, right? And so you'll find everything you need to kind of create a healthy home there. Of course, there's services if you need, help with improving your air quality, remediation, et cetera. If you're looking for me as a professional or as an expert, you can go to the michaelrubino.com. And last but not least, I don't just do this for fun. I'm very passionate about what I do. And I have a 501c3 nonprofit called Change the Air Foundation, of which I am a co-founder of and chairman of the board. And we've only been around for about 2 years, and we've really kicked some butt. We have a new law that just passed in Illinois that's going to really provide people with better access to information on the State Department's website. And it's also going to require, because Illinois didn't have any sort of registration, certification, nothing for mold professionals, meaning like I can go from cutting lawns one day to being a mold expert the next day, right? Well, that's now a thing of the past, thanks to the law we just helped pass. You have to be registered and certified to be registered to do business. Now, it's going to help. It's not the end all be all, but it certainly is going to stop people dead in their tracks from not having any sort of education and going into people's homes and making things worse. And so if you are into education, if you are into policy reform, if you are into research, this policy brief project we did really was amazing because it was the first body of work that really acknowledged mold's not just about asthma, that's like the only thing we've ever really, confidently said, but it's about all these multi-system, disruptions that it causes, right? And not to mention the cost of asthma alone is $6 to $22 billion annually on our healthcare system. It's all in there, right? And we start saying, well, if that's what asthma does, what about all these other things that mold can cause? And what's the cost of that? And we start to see some pretty stark numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason we paid for this research project at Change the Air Foundation is because we want to show our congressmen and women and senators that this is a big problem and it's impacting us and it's impacting America's bottom line, because the amount of people that are on this healthcare system where they really are just causing so much money from undiagnosed issues due to air quality. It's astronomical. And it's something that we want to show them by investing in a cleaner air program for America, by making sure that people in military housing have better air quality, by making sure that Section 8 housing has better air quality and low-income families have better air quality. We're going to take that burden and we're going to improve it dramatically. This isn't like, mold has always been for that side of the fence. It's always been this like liability. Oh, I don't want to think about this as a liability. Insurance companies don't want to deal with it. No one wants to deal with it. We have to stop looking at it that way. This is an investment into our future. What kind of world do we want our kids and grandkids to live in?
Yeah.
Certainly not the world and the trajectory it's headed, because we have never been sicker than we are today. Never. Like the age expectancy that used to go up and up and up for the first time just the other year started going down. We're actually living not longer anymore. We're living shorter lives. It's time we wake up and realize that air quality is a big endeavor here. that we need to invest in for longevity, for better health, for better wellness, just better quality of life. And
Preach, preach. Yeah.
that foundation exists to help make that a reality, because it's not about me trying to fix houses one at a time. It's about me trying to make change. And I want my kids to have a better chance of succeeding than I do. And the only way that's possible is if we make this world a better place than it is.
That reminds me when you said that of the Netflix series Made. Did you ever watch that?
I didn't know.
So I mean, it's great. You should see it. It came out a couple years ago, but essentially she was in low income housing, single mom, and her daughter kept getting sick because there was so much mold growing on the wall. Literally, you could see it just growing on the wall. So she kept missing work, but she needed to get work so she could get food stamps. I mean, it was just like this vicious cycle. She
Dwindling
was just,
spiral.
yes, she couldn't get out of, and her poor daughter kept spiking fevers and getting sick. And you're just like, your heart just goes out for this woman who just can't get ahead in life. And so thank you for your passion, thank you for your foundation. This episode was wonderful. I do want to mention at the HomeCleanse shop for the listeners, if they use the code longevity, they get 5% off. So be sure to use that. I'll also put the link in the show notes to the dust test for listeners if they want to take advantage and test their home, get some more very beneficial information. So you told our listeners where they could find you. Lastly, what is your top longevity tip?
Well, breathing clean air, obviously, but all jokes aside, I recently just lost 25 pounds, and
Congratulations. Yeah.
yes, I've become like sensitive to mold myself over the years, just being exposed
Yeah.
to all kinds of things. And detoxing is a big deal for me. And yeah, I could tell when I start like gaining weight, no matter how hard I try to eat clean or exercise. Like, I know detoxing is what I need to look at
Yep.
next, and
Yep.
become to really know my body. And so I encourage everybody to detox. There's so many different ways to do that. The best
Hmm.
thing for me that works for me is the sauna. I think detoxing, and you have to like get your diet straight to detox too, because you can be increase toxins through your diet. You got to drink clean water, and you got to breathe clean air. All those three things make the detoxing process go a lot smoother and faster. But I think you know we've all come accustomed to this idea of like our body naturally detoxes, right? And so why do we need to help it? Well, because we have more crap entering our body every day, more toxins entering our body every day than ever before. Um, Believe me, no matter which sector you look at, you will find that as a true statement. So we need a little help. And so, don't let anybody make fun of you for, trying to get your health in line and detoxing and trying all these things. You're not woo woo, you're smart. And I just wanted to make that clear.
Love it. You are smart. You're smart for listening to this episode. Okay, so thank you again, Michael, for coming on the show today. Thank you for your passion for just improving air quality across the board and for your foundation. Our future generations will definitely thank you for that. So, thank you today specifically for sharing how dangerous poor air quality really can be and providing so much insight into how we can improve this and ultimately our health. This was excellent. Appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.